Hey everyone, welcome back. This is our extended bonus content, a little extra mile from our episode with Daniel Frerot here, episode 14. And so if you listen to that one and you're here, we want to welcome you guys and listen to the conversation and just continue some more topics that are chiller and just laid back.
Yeah, a lot more to talk about.
Just a little more conversation to go with your work day or whatever you're doing, listening to us.
Yeah. In France, we were talking about a lot of the differences between just French culture in general and American culture, and now kind of get more specified. We talked a little bit about it too between French Christians and American Christians. What do you think are some misunderstandings that French Christians have about American Christians and vice versa? What are some misunderstandings that we might have about French Christians? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? What are some of the ideas you got in your head?
So misunderstanding of American culture. They do not understand the Christians from the U.S. often look very rigid to them. They've grown up very worldly, and they do not understand many of the stands from America. Those are more controversial topics. For example, sometimes we do not understand the subjects of the positions on alcohol. They do not understand the positions sometimes that are taken on the dress codes. And I'm not saying here that these things are wrong. Don't take me wrong, but it's just a misunderstanding. They do not understand the positions of Christians in regard to politics sometimes. There are good reasons why Christians do what they do in the United States, and vice versa. Sometimes the people from the U.S. do not understand the French position on a number of the same issues.
Yeah. So like with, you think politics is the biggest one, or do you think it's individual subjects that are the biggest divide of misunderstanding?
Yeah, individual subjects, but politics is at the root of it also. It affects the American Constitution is very different from the French Constitution, and so it comes with a number of you grow up being very nationalistic, and a number of countries in Europe are not that way at all. And some of the rights that you have in the Constitution are not given to the French people the same way, or Belgium or Swiss. And so it makes it difficult for them to understand how a Christian has different ideas than them on a number of subjects.
So France, like those other Western European nations, not nationalistic like at all, because when I'm very sports minded, so the World Cup, I see the World Cup, and like when France won the World Cup, like people were going crazy, like they were very proud France won. Yeah. So what's the difference between nationalism in Europe versus America? Because you're saying there's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I should make also a difference. Not every region is the same. Not every country where they speak French is the same.
Gotcha.
I also speak with my Belgian background. If you ask most Belgian people to sing the national anthem from the French-speaking part, most of them will not be able to sing you the song. In fact, I don't know any of the words from a national anthem.
You don't?
No, really?
And if you ask them, they do the test on TVs many times, they will start singing the anthem from France and not the anthem from Belgium. And it's because they do not know it. And so that explains it. France, they tend to be more patriotic than Belgium, more patriotic than the Swiss. The Swiss are proud of their chocolate. The Belgians are proud of their chocolate, but that's the extent of it. So,
Man.
Do you, like for sporting events in France, do they sing their national anthem before sporting events?
No, not like here. And but when in the Olympics, it's played obviously when they win. But sports, about the only exception, soccer. They're very proud of their players for soccer.
It's football there, though, right?
Yeah.
Is it football? Okay.
Yeah.
So in France. Yeah, there was I think it was the Dallas Mavericks. that said they're going to stop doing the national anthem before games. Did you see that,
Really?
George? Yeah.
Really?
Everyone was mad.
Was that Mark Cuban's call?
Yeah, that's Mark Cuban's
Really?
team.
What
yeah.
was his take on that? I don't know.
I don't know. He
Did you read
owns
it?
the place. They were like, we're just done doing it. The Dallas Stars, a hockey team, they play in the same arena, and they're like, no, like we're proud of
doing it.
We're going to keep doing it.
Wow.
But of course, especially Texans weren't thrilled. They were done doing the national anthem before a basketball game. I thought everyone did that. I remember that being shocking to me, hearing from other people out of the United States saying, no, we don't have our national anthem before the game. I was like, oh, that's just us, I guess.
Texas even has its own like Pledge of Allegiance.
I've heard that.
That the students do. Yeah.
Did you actually do it?
Paige said she does. I
Paige
didn't
did
go
it?
to school.
Yeah,
there.
right. But Paige
yeah,
did it?
yeah. Everyone.
What
says,
is it?
Says they do. I don't know it,
I
but
go-
I
I
think
Google
there's a
this.
different. I could be totally wrong. That tells you I'm not. Like I want to be Texan, but I just don't have the experience. There's like a different hand motion or something like that.
What?
I know Texas is like has its own pride within its own. It's its
like-
own
yeah.
thing, its own culture in a way, yeah. Which is cool and unique. I really like it. I think it makes Texas stand out.
So let me say one thing about
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
that I think is important to understand. You look at a lot of congregations in the first century, a lot of the letters that were written. There's a lot of problems between the Jews and the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And there's a reason when you started for verse, a previous podcast, when you asked, you read in Galatians, we are one in Christ. There's no
Yes.
more Jews, no Greek. The reason why all of that is very present in the scripture is because they were often fighting. And they were fighting about the traditions, what they held dear from their past life. And in many cases, the traditions can divide. It should bring us closer, but it's often a cause and a source of division. So it can be true within Christians within the same country, and it is also true with Christianity as a whole in the world. We need to be very careful because a number of these issues are shaped by our background. The right to carry a weapon, the serving in the military service or not, drinking alcohol. We all come with a number of issues that are shaped by our education background.
Yeah.
Sometimes the Bible, and some points are easier for us to have to take a step backwards and look at it. Look at it with a more objective view. And there are some points, because it's so ingrained in our culture, we've got a hard time doing that. Let us never leave these points become a subject of contention and a source of division between Christians.
Yeah.
That's good.
It's really weird. There's a gentleman in the college I was at who's a preacher in India, and he came over and he talked about how, this is not biblical necessarily, but how marriages are arranged there. That's how it goes. But then in the Bible itself, a sharp disagreement between us and the West and them was, he's like, you go to church out there in India, all the women wear a head covering there. He's like, that's how it is. He's like, that's what the text says, but also that's part of the Indian culture there as well. And it definitely sounds like it lines up with 1 Corinthians 11. He was like, people are shocked that they come out to Europe or especially America and they don't see that. And to them, they're like, what are you missing? Like, there's some of those cultural things. Is there anything like that with France?
Well, we do have our issues with, for example, in our church, it came up with the dreadlocks. You were talking about soccer players. We've got some kids who are playing professionally in Strasbourg.
Oh, wow.
And,
That's pretty
teenagers,
cool.
they're playing in the soccer teams. Some of them are playing for Germany. Another one is playing for France.
Yeah.
And they tend to follow the fashion. And fashion was dreadlocks for a boy in the hair.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for some of our refugees from Africa, unfortunately for those boys, in the countries of Africa, it is just reserved for women to wear dreadlocks.
Oh.
And so it created an issue, for example, with what Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 11, that a man should not wear a long hair. The word in the Greek is more like decked out like a woman. There's more notion of decoration than a notion of length, although length can be also tied to it.
Yeah.
But certainly, there the culture is at play. What does it mean to be decked out like a woman in your hair? Well, for the Jamaicans, having dreadlocks would not be looking like a woman. But for some of the countries in Africa, it meant being like a woman. And so we had to resolve those differences, so that it didn't become a conflict in our church.
That's interesting.
That's very interesting.
It is. It's not like that's different because it's hair and it's like one style. Whereas you have the kind of a similar argument with the jeans, the denim. No jeans for women, but you know, they have men's jeans and women's jeans. But with dreadlocks, it's dreadlocks.
That's funny. I know Viking culture, it was manly to have like long hair. It was like the part of the thing there. So that's
Braid your
interesting though.
beard.
You said that. Yeah, they braid the beard. That's interesting that you said it's just kind of more. It's more about looking feminine or masculine. It's about picking one way. But there's another subject. So speaking of that subject, masculinity and being feminine and all that, I'm going to guess, is France a lot further down the line when it comes to progressive issues like that, like LGBT community and gay marriage and things like that? Or is it about the same as America? Is there gay marriage in France?
Yes, but we are actually more conservative than the United States. It's surprising.
What?
But first of all, there's at play the Muslim community. And I told you there's a big number of atheists, but there are also lots of Catholics. And it's weird to say it that way, but when you look at statistics, you've got about 15% of the population that is Catholic. But when you ask them, do you believe in God, they say no. But they still hold firm to the traditions of their grandparents.
It's like their culture.
That's a culture thing as well. Yes. And so it's at play. So we are way more conservative. France is more conservative on a number of issues. It's coming. The age of abortion, for example, till what point can you abort a child? It was only a few months, whereas in the US you can go till a baby is born, almost, with partial birth abortion. Same thing for the gay marriage. They still do not have the right to adopt. It is just now changing. We still had the right to spank our children. You had done away with that a long time ago. And it's just now in the works in France where they're changing the law. And same thing for the gay community. They still do not have many rights that they have in the United States. But Hollywood has a great impact upon our society. And Hollywood is doing all that it can to change our thinking.
Yeah.
And so we're not too far behind, and we're changing as well.
I feel like in America, when I talk with people in that community, their identity is your sexuality. Is that the same thing in France? It's like everything's wrapped up around your sexuality out there? Or is it, like you're saying, a little more conservative?
Yeah, sexuality is a big part of who we are. But you don't hear about it as much as you do in the United States, with, for example, people choosing to even operate their children to give a change of sex. That's almost unheard of in France.
Really?
And when you talk about it, they're shocked by all of that. But sexuality is always important.
Oh yeah.
So,
George, you got another question?
Are the Christians there in France more political, more engaged in the politics of France?
Yes and no. It depends on what subject. For example, very few Christians will take the time to go vote.
Really?
Yes. And so, at least in France. In Belgium, it's mandatory. So there will be, they follow a lot more the news than you do in the United States. So they're quicker to criticize, but it will not be as divisive. They learn from a young age to debate in the school and kind of leave the emotion aside. So it's easier for them to oppose ideas without getting upset and without calling each other names. And it seems that
a good thing.
That's a whole lot harder when you've not learned that from your youth. So you have different thinking in the congregations, but it does not divide. When they stand on different place politically, it does not divide like it can in the United States.
Wow.
So do people so you got a smaller group of people at your church. Are there very different ideological or political views within your church, or is it all pretty much on the same page?
After a while, when you hang together, you start to resemble each other.
Yeah.
And so we eventually, biblical thinking replace political thinking.
Right.
It just takes maturity. on a number of subjects, you come to a conclusion. Since we're not afraid to talk about things, here there are a number of issues. They're so explosive. You stay away from them, and there we don't stay away from subjects. We just talk about it, and in that case, it brings harmony later. It may not always at first. We don't view things the same way, but eventually we come down to...
But if there's a disagreement, you're still going to church and worshiping together.
Yeah, it's not at least on politics, it's not a big issue.
Wow.
Culture is harder to handle.
Culture is a harder issue.
Yeah.
Really?
I remember in California, there are some people who are upset. There was a preacher out there I knew of where he voted Democrat, and people are like, I can't go to church with someone who did that. Like, I thought that, and they're like, any kind of like difference in that way, they're like out. And that was like a black and white done deal for them. That's funny. Not exactly that way in France.
Wow. Now, I'm gonna go here, I guess.
All right.
I mean, there's a race issue here. That's a big topic in America. We had a great episode. Let's listen, where we talked about that and race in the church. What does that look like in France, especially in the church?
Yeah, we've had the same. When it happened here, it created uproar as well in France, because we do have similar situations that happen. When you look in the Bible, I preached about that when we were going through all the problems about Abraham. He traveled to a foreign land to get relief. He's in a situation where he cannot survive, where he's at, in the promised land. And so he decides to go down to Egypt. And whenever he goes down to Egypt, he loses his wife, partly because he chooses not to be totally honest. But if he's totally honest, he's in a dilemma, because then he can be killed instead of just having his wife stolen from him. So he hides part of the truth. But my point is, whenever he goes there, he does not benefit from the same rights as an Egyptian. When you do go to a country where you don't have blood ties, where you are not well represented by others from your community, it is a whole lot easier for you to be the subject of abuse and to be discriminated against, to encounter situations where you will be mistreated. So we have got to make a difference. And as Christians, it's very important to be sensitive to those refugees who may go through these trials, who may experience sometimes a bad situation because of discrimination, because of racism. But by the same token, it is important also to have faith in God, that God will take care of it. And as a people of God, we've got the responsibility to love all men and to love foreigners. That comes with an ability not only to sympathize and empathize, it comes also with a responsibility to do whatever we can to love them, integrate them, and show kindness to them.
That's really good.
Yeah. I remember in Deuteronomy 10, God just laying out the law, obviously, to Israel. He told them in Deuteronomy 10:19, love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. It kind of makes me think of what Jesus gets getting at about, here's a golden rule, treat someone else the way you would want to be treated. And that's God's message to Israel. It's like, look, once you were strangers in a land, be kind to the strangers that come in your land. And understand, like, there are, of course, logistics and things about this that have to be discussed. But it's always surprised me in America that usually conservative politicians and politics generally side with Christianity for reasons that I understand. And then it gets to this subject, and all of a sudden there's a real big lack of love and care about it. And I don't understand. You and I had dinner a few weeks ago. You were talking about some things you're seeing. Was it customs in the U.S. that were pretty ungodly?
Yeah.
What were some of the things you saw there?
Well, for example, I saw a missionary's wife, no, a preacher's wife. He was from Mexico.
Okay.
They were both green card holders, but when she traveled out and came back, she was pregnant. She was 2 months from delivering, and she got automatically isolated. She was put in handcuff and tied to a desk, handcuffed to a wrist, handcuffed to ankles. And they didn't want to let her back in because they were afraid that she was going to give birth in the United States. And somehow the baby would be an American. So I've seen a number of issues like that come up. I know it's not easy. When you take the Israelites, they were slaves for a while before after Joseph, before Moses came. And the fear from Pharaoh and his people would be that the culture would be changed, that the Israelite would be stronger than them. And it is what happens. I was talking to you about France. We get a number of Muslims that come inside of our country,
Right.
and now we turn down the church. We're replacing them with mosques. And so it does tend to change the culture, and it's not what we want. I wouldn't want Islam to replace a Christian background.
Right.
But by the other hand, I'm not sure how we can stop it. And really, as a Christian, am I going to be able to make a difference in that? Not on a large scale. I don't put too much trust in politics. What I put trust into is the gospel.
Amen.
And one person at a time, I can impact a change. And this change will be the right change when I bring the gospel inside the picture.
It's an opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah. To reach that person, even though they're different, have a different culture and views, to share the gospel with them. That's really good.
Of course, if it keeps going with Islam, at some point Christianity will be forbidden. There they slice the hands of those, slice the tendons and the flesh of those who carry a Bible in Saudi Arabia, for example.
Wow.
And so that's not what I want for France. And I'm not sure that we can change the way that the country evolves. We can maybe slow it down, but we need to be careful because the hate speech and the fear, it's very easy to be caught into all of that. And as a Christian, my responsibility is to love despite differences, and I'm going to put my trust in God in this case and pray.
Yeah.
Amen.
Prayer. God sets up kings. He removes kings. That's definitely something to pray about. Fear. So, you said out there in France, they're not super into politics as much as it is out here. So what were their views on, you said they shared a similar, so when Black Lives Matter marches started happening, that happened in France as well?
Yes.
That happened in France, so they shared that. Did they share an affinity with like when the Trump riot happened and stuff at D.C.? What were Christians' thoughts of that out there? Was that...
Oh, they cannot understand that.
They don't understand that? Huh.
They very socialist in the way that they view the government is responsible for everything. So that's different that way. And yeah, I've presented some negative point about the U.S. I want to be very careful to have a balanced presentation here. You've got in politics here the ability to bring Christianity into it. In France, we do not have this ability. Religion and state are very much separate. The concept is in the United States that government needs to stay out of religion, but religion can still in some ways enter government. They realize that a man is not able to leave his conviction at home when he goes outside of his door during the day. In France, it's the opposite. They feel like government has the right to enter religion, and religion should never enter government. And so it makes it a whole lot harder for Christianity to thrive. And in America is way better in the political system as far as that is concerned.
Big blessing.
Yeah, it is.
Something
It's
to
super
thank
cool.
God for here. Each side with that in mind, each side has, unique things that they'll probably understand better than the other, and vice versa. Sometimes we're very culturally limited.
That's right.
In that way.
I mean, that's why it's important to have these conversations,
Yeah.
to see those perspectives, so that we can remember what the goal is, to be unified under Christ.
Right. and we're all citizens of the same place in heaven ultimately. Right. And yeah, it's really funny you said they just don't understand like the Trump situation and all that, and hear it. That's like for a lot of people, they're like, they've tied that in directly with Christianity. And that's really interesting, the differences that people are viewing.
So the Christians here really like the freedoms that you were talking about just a second ago in America, and I think that's a super big blessing when we can use those for our benefits, and I think a lot of Christians do as well. Would the French people and the French Christians be comfortable with freedom like that?
Oh, yes, they would love it.
Really?
Yeah. Whenever they present these situations like Trump, they never talk about all the Christianity issues that are tied to it.
Really?
Whenever we talk about abortion, gay rights, everything else, that plays, as you mentioned, into our views politically, but the news do not talk about any of these things. And if you present some of these facts to the European and you say this is why Christians in the US are worried about it, then all of a sudden, even the Muslims, even the others, they say, wow, even the non-Christians, when they hear that now it's allowed to give a sex change to a child, they do not understand that. When they hear that you can abort a baby with partial birth abortion, they're shocked. They're totally disgusted by that.
Yeah.
And they do not understand how it is possible. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, why don't they ever speak about that on our TV, on our news? But Satan does a good job at hiding some of the issues.
Mm. Wow. I have so many questions.
I know, and I know a big thing that's been going on, and we're kind of nearing an end, hopefully, is COVID. I mean, was that a big deal there in France? I mean, it was worldwide, obviously.
I mean, it's locked down there, right?
Yes, total lockdown.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So your church has not been able to meet at all since it first locked down last March, almost a year ago. Wow.
Correct. We have been under strict lockdown, which came with some we able to do with outreach, things we've never been able to do before, but it cannot last forever because otherwise you run to the end of the contacts. What do I mean by we've been able to do things we've never been able to do before?
Yeah.
People have more time on their hand.
Right.
They cannot go out on Sundays to the lake. You can't go out more than once a day, an eighth of a mile, and you've got to fill out a paper when you do with a time an eighth of a mile. And so we saw on TV people who go biking in the middle of the woods, and the police are still patrolling, and they will go running after people who are by themselves in the middle of the wood to tackle them down and arrest them. Same thing.
You can't get COVID when you tackle someone.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, aren't they like making it? I don't know.
I saw a guy swimming about 100 yards from the shore, and by himself in the ocean, and they would come with boats to pull him out of the water and arrest him, saying you can give COVID to somebody else if you swim by yourself in the ocean. So because of all of that, the people have been very isolated. In some countries like Belgium, you don't have a right to receive more than one person or two people to your home. They've been isolated on lockdown. They have a desire for contacts outside the home, and having church online with Zoom has provided a means for them to have social interactions.
That's good.
And provided them with time to come listen to services when they would not have taken the time before. That was a positive aspect. However, if it lasts too long, you run to the end of your contacts because you need to go preach to many people and meet many people to find the few that will be receptive.
Man, do you feel like some of the Christians there that might have been new or weaker have gotten stronger through this, or not so much? Or is it maybe hurt?
Yeah, they definitely are stronger.
Oh.
Some of them have time to study the Bible way more in depth. I was able to train 2 leaders thanks to it in the church in Verviers with daily Bible studies. Some who were weaker, maybe have gone a little further in their weakness. So it just depends for who. It has had some positive result. We have a number of isolated Christians. We did not have the possibility to broadcast from church because we do not have internet at church. But moving it to my home, as I preached, allowed us to reach those isolated Christians. It allowed us to pull in another congregation with us when we had services. So it was very rich for all these people who were isolated spiritually. It's rich to always have a larger congregation where you have more of an exchange in ideas compared to being by yourself. So it's not being negative on all parts, but it's not meant to last forever as it is neither.
Yeah, that's good. And I think we see the end of the tunnel here in America. Do you guys see that for France?
It's the opposite. Right there in France, they are having the African variants and the English variants, so things are going worse in the lockdown, and the number of infected is growing way faster.
Is there a vaccine out there in France?
Yeah, they're going a bit faster than here to give it out. So,
okay, we got something.
Yeah, it's something. But the variant, the vaccine drops from 90% to 40% effective against the variants of a COVID.
Oh, yikes.
Wow. Man, it's totally different.
Do you think by the end of 2021, France would be normal or no?
Yeah, they say that at least it'll be the end of 2021 before it's back to normal. In countries like Australia are closed till the end of 21. They're talking beginning of 22. So if you plan a trip, wait to purchase your plane ticket.
Yeah. Man.
Wow.
So some big cons there, and it's a lot stricter. But at the same time, you're able to reach out to people who were not being reached out to.
Correct.
All right. I mean, after all, God uses all things.
That's right.
All things.
That's right. Yeah. It's really good. What do you got? I'm out.
Oh, you're out. You're out, George. You're done. You've asked all the questions possible?
No, I'm sure there'll be more come with me. But right now, my head is just thinking about someone getting tackled off their bike
in the middle of nowhere. Then the cops got COVID for You'd think they wouldn't touch them if they're all. I don't know.
Yeah.
So here's one. Let me tell you a bit more on that aspect. It creates a number of issues in the families to be under total lockdown like this. And also being with all the business closed, we have had a lot more depressions and also abuse within families. We have seen, even in the church, families totally torn apart. Men who were forced to live with children before the way they survived was by being outside of a home. They lessen the noise and they can live with it. Now they're at home with the babies. They blow a fuse. We've had a member who tried to, her husband tried to kill himself twice when that happened.
Oh,
He walked out with a rope. He walked out with his ladder. He threw the rope above a branch of a tree and jumped with a rope around his neck. And the wife had to lift him up. He did all of that in front of his children. The wife had to try to lift him up as well as she could while she called the firemen. But looking at the positive aspect of it, he did that twice, and he was finally put into an institute for depressed people. And the good point out of it is now he's talking about being baptized. He was an unbeliever, and after going through these trials, he started reading his Bible when he was in the Institute for Health, and now he's talking about being baptized. So there are some positive points, and we need to concentrate on them, despite the difficulty.
Man, that's an amazing story. It's sad, tragic, but it's interesting.
So he went from trying to kill himself to now he's very interested in the gospel.
He's reading the Bible every day. I'm having interactions with him online.
Really?
He's reading the Bible every day, and he's talking about baptism, and he's now praying with his wife. And he was very, very atheistic. He didn't want to hear about the church.
So was his wife a Christian? And that's how you knew him?
Yes, his wife was a Christian. She was a refugee. He met her in Africa, and he brought her here. He would deprive us from food at times. He was very mean, very abusive with her.
Oh, my.
And then all of this happened, and now he's brought down to his knees.
Wow.
And looking to the Lord and wanting a change of life.
It's a drastic change.
Every time in personal circles, it's truly Satan talking, where I'm like, there's no way he or she is going to change because they're just so, and like that case, you're talking about someone abusing his own family. You just think this person's way off the radar for obeying the gospel, that there's no hope. I mean, that's just worldly thinking, because the gospel, like you're talking about this man being brought down to his knees, can change anyone. I mean, anyone, the most wicked. I mean, you just look at Paul, I guess Saul. I mean, that guy was holding the jackets for all the guys so they could stone Stephen to death. And that guy was changed with an encounter, one encounter with Christ. And, of course, today now it's going to be in the Word, our encounter with him. But I always have to read. It's good for me to hear these stories. It keeps me to have hope for people I'm trying to reach who I just don't think will change. And that's shame on me. It's kind of judgmental, actually, when we say, well, there's no way that person would obey.
There's great power in God and His gospel. And it's saying in a way that God can't do that. Like, He can't change that person. God can do wondrous things, and He can change any heart.
Yeah. And broken marriages, relationships, anything of that nature. It always amazes me when I see people where their marriage they should be divorced, considering all the awful things they did to each other, or people you said where they've just abused their bodies with drugs or their families or whatnot, where you're like, there's no way they could fix their life. And that's what makes me really sad when people put limits on God. Whether I've heard, like I said, with myself, where like, can't change. I'm like, wow. I mean, what do we actually believe, right? Like, do you think that God can make a difference or not? But that is sad, though, that the lockdowns out there would bring someone to that, desperate of a measure in their mind. Is that common? Are there suicide rates going up?
Oh, yeah, very, very high right now.
It's horrible. That's very horrible. I remember reading about that initially in America, but a lot of places, I think even California now, are generally open. So it's gone down, but something we haven't talked about. You got anything else, George? Just kind of
No, I think that's good.
All right.
I think that's a wrap.
That's
you guys
a wrap.
are good. That's a good way to end it.
The last question I got then.
Go for it.
Daniel, what is your favorite passage or story in the Bible? That's a tough one.
Oh.
But it's just for fun. You got a favorite verse? You got a favorite, character, story? Like, what's your favorite?
That's good.
It's probably Daniel.
Daniel's pretty cool.
Come on, Caleb. I mean, yours is probably Caleb.
Actually, mine is either Jonah. I like Jonah. That's probably my favorite story. Followed by, actually, I like Daniel a lot too. Very different guys. But I'm asking you, not me. So,
well, one of them that I really like is the one that you already mentioned, Romans chapter 1, verse 16.
Oh, sneeze. Bless you. That's okay. Romans 1:16. Yeah, we read that in the other version, that I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for our salvation to everyone who believes, the Jew first and then also to the Greek, attributing the gospel being the power of God, which is what we were just talking about. Why can't God change someone? Why would we limit him?
Right.
So that's your favorite verse, you think? Favorite? Daniel's got to sneeze. That's all right. Bless you.
Got something in the throat. Makes it hard. Yes,
it's
is
COVID.
Definitely one of my favorite passage. So many of them in the scriptures. It's hard to narrow it down to one. But I would definitely pick this one first. And as far as the favorite person, probably Paul is one of my favorites in the scripture.
Paul's a favorite guy. All right, now press it. Do you have a favorite Old Testament person?
Yeah, I really like Jeremiah.
Jeremiah.
One of those that I really like.
Jeremiah's a favorite.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
All right.
Pretty good.
So favorite passage, Romans 1. George, who's your favorite Old Testament?
My favorite Old Testament character?
I know, it's tough. There's so many people.
There's so many. I don't think I've ever went like, well, that one is my favorite.
You don't have a standout?
I don't really have a standout. I do like, I talked about Ehud Sunday.
Dude, I love that story.
It's probably one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's so good. But and I wasn't expecting to pull out what I did in that sermon too, so that made it fun, especially when you can see new passages in a new light. It really brings out more of an appreciation for not only that person, but God's word and what he's saying through that story and that message. I like that. King David is a big one too. You can learn so much from him, and his psalms are so good. Just the human emotion he brings out, and and how he relates his relationship with God. Just really good, really helpful. Yeah.
Matthew 6:33. This is one of my favorites. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. I think that's a good place to kind of close off on, because as Daniel's been talking about, there are many preachers out there and Christians that are in need, who are seeking God's kingdom first, and we're going to be part of accomplishing God's will when it comes to meeting the needs of those people, and that includes us trusting God so that we can be generous and that we can take risks for Him. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was really good.
Thank you for your invitation. Thank you to the congregation for all that you do to also support our work and pray for us. And you guys are amazing. You have a very special church here in Lubbock. I was so blessed to be part of it for the time when we were here renewing our paperwork. And it is a blessing every time I come back, including you two. So.
That's very nice.
Very good.
Well, I think that's a wrap. Everyone.
That's a wrap. Thank you for listening.